My name's Theresa Eisenbarth, and we're going to be going to some of the locations that I had painted for my Esplanade exhibit. So this is the corner. This is, I called it Where It All Begins, being Dominion Street and Minto Avenue. So actually it's interesting, when I was painting for the exhibit, my kids would come upstairs and I was painting, and I think out of all the paintings I did 38 of them, this was the hardest corner to paint, and I kind of painted it in the middle of the exhibit, and I can't explain why it was so difficult to paint, but they would come up and they'd say, Mom, you need to fix that, you need to do this, you need to change that, you need to do this. And then I'd go back to painting furiously, and then I'd come back and it would look exactly how I started again. Just what I tell people not to do in the workshops, I was doing at the same time. So I said, I have about $1,000 of paint on that painting. Anyways, it was the corner. I had difficulties with it. What can I say? I'm gonna walk this way. My favorite thing when we grew up, even though we had to go and hoe and weed and do all that stuff and help out for a little bit, my sister and I loved peas, like the shelled peas. Like now, I bought some last week. They're like $7.99 for a bag of peas, and it was only like this big. But we didn't take a little bag. We took huge bread bags, you know, and we filled 4 or 5 or 6 of them up. And we thought we were so smart. We filled them up when my mom was sleeping one afternoon, and we went down the street, probably to about where that white car was, and we sat on the curb and we ate all the peas and we threw all the shells all over the road. And we thought we were so smart. Oh, she'll never go down there. She'll never walk down the street down there and see where the shells of the peas were. Oh my God, did we get a whooping. Oh. It was all, it was, because you have to remember, that's your whole peas frozen for the whole winter, right? So we ate them all.
The 4 bags?
4 or 5 bags. They were like this big, just little, but we loved them, and we could never eat them, so we raided our own garden. That was our house. That was our number 1214. So in the brochure, 1214 Blanket of Memories, obviously it's not a made-up photo. It's actually we had a white picket fence like that. It's actually a photo from another house down on the flats down from Bridge Street. So anyways, it was used for reference to paint that. This was the end of the street where I grew up. So this was Dominion Street. Actually, all this corner here was Dominion. And, you know, when you're a small child, you have many memories of the neighbors that lived on the street. And it was kind of a little microcosm of your own little world. This particular painting was at the end of the street, and it was so vivid in my mind because after the street, there was no, it was all industrial area, but there was a huge field of prairie grasses, and we would spend tons of time playing in that field. Like it seemed like it was just a bubble within a bubble. When we ran our kites there, I remember laying in the grasses and looking at the clouds, and you know, and then we would toddle off on through the prairie grasses. The next thing you know, we'd be in the industrial area, which was Delta Pottery. And at that time, Delta Pottery was kind of like a no zone. You weren't supposed to go there because in the 70s, it was a little bit abandoned, although it was a huge production facility in its time from like the early 1900s up until that time. But the reason they didn't want people to go there is because there were shards of pottery in all of the grass area and mounds of it, kind of, that was, you could just go back and pick up a cup or half a saucer or something. So yeah, it was kind of an odd thing. And now when you look back, because Delta Pottery is so coveted now, but then you think back then, well, we could have just went and picked it off all the piles, right? I mean, you didn't, but you could have. So that was one of the reasons. It was kind of like the no-go zone after the street going over to the pottery area, the industrial area. So yeah, and it was funny, my brother, and you know how funny people are in a family, and you have a lot of family dynamics going on all the time. And my brother, so this house and the one next to it, often they would order Kentucky Fried Chicken. And back then, you know, they didn't have like skip the dishes or anything, so they would order it and it would come in a cab. And my brother was so terrible, they would wait across the street, and as soon as they would drop the chicken off on the front step, they'd go and take it for supper. So like, it's odd, the little things that you remember. Anyways, that's that corner. I've always been creating something, and generally I've had my hands in lots of different medium for art. Even when I was little, like we lived, our old house that we had on Dominion Street, I remember kind of salmony pink walls, and it was an old house, and we had 8 kids, and one of my mom's first things that she did was take my art from what I would draw, either in school or even when I was younger than that, and it was covered all over the kitchen. Maybe sometimes it was to cover up the cracks in the walls, but, you know, to me that was always inspiring, and she was always proud of it. So I think that was kind of a inspiration for me to create. And through the years, even though I worked in business for many years, I always had a creative job because I was in marketing. Then when I stayed at home with my kids, when we had kids, then I did a lot of creative projects in terms of stuff for schools and murals, and I don't know, I always seemed to be painting and doing something. So Medicine Hat was one of the first in the late 1800s to be settled in the West, and it does have a rich history in terms of farming, and ranching is really big industries here, but also pottery and china. For years and years and years, we used to call it a town, and we still do call it a town for residents that have grown up here. It's a city of about 63,000 people now, and we're based in the southern eastern corner of Alberta. The River Flats is an area of Medicine Hat that is along the river valley of the South Saskatchewan River, and was one of the first areas settled in Medicine Hat, that and the hill. So kind of like the old town was settled by the South Saskatchewan, and then from there the CPR came in, the RCMP, and then parts of the river flats started to grow with residents moving to Medicine Hat. Originally, it was blue-collar workers. You know, they worked at Medelta, they worked at Ogilvy Mills. We had Alpha Dairies that used to be in the industrial area. So it was a very industrial part of the city. And then consequently, all those families lived down there because, you know, you could walk to work. We were originally on Dominion Street, so kind of at the far end of the flats area. I mean, they used to call us flat rats because there was just so many of us down there. You kind of got to know everybody in your area, but being from a large family, I would know other families because I had older siblings that, you know, they hung out with you know, the Italian family or the Portuguese family, or you know, the Polish people down the street. You know, they had a number of kids, so, you know, one brother hung out with their daughters or whatever. So so it was really an interconnected neighborhood. They had some amazing architects back then in Medicine Hat, and they built some beautiful houses, some Victorian houses. I mean, our house was from 1930, but it still had like really unique woodwork and character in it. I had wanted to paint the river flats because I had started painting some house portraits, and when I started walking around there with my dog, we had a new puppy, and you need places to walk, so I naturally went down to where I grew up. And, you know, I started looking around. I thought, you know, that's pretty cool. Or that house there has a neat sign. Or I really like the way that door is. Or those are the things I pick out. Or, you know, I love the old trees and I like the old boulevards. And to me, it just felt like home. Like walking down amongst my old neighborhood, that's home to me. That's kind of what I knew. So I thought, well, why don't I paint what I know?
I'm Xanthi Isbister. I'm the Curator of Art at the Esplanade Arts and Heritage Centre. The Esplanade is unique to Western Canada in that it is a performing arts theatre, a museum, an archives, and an art gallery, all under one roof in Medicine Hat, Alberta. Walking the Flats by Theresa Eisenbarth and The Anatomy of a Glass Menagerie Alta Glass by Mireille Perron, who is a Calgary-based artist, are the first exhibitions post-COVID. Both of the exhibitions' concepts are actually rooted in a very special from a very special location in Medicine Hat called the River Flats. Theresa grew up in Medicine Hat, and as a child, her home was in the River Flats. And so last October, once the exhibition was confirmed, she spent, I think, 14 hours walking the flats, we call it the flats, the river flats, documenting special places from her memory, and also just currently places that she's connected to and finds beauty in. So with that, she then took those photographs, and they were the foundation for the 36 paintings that are installed here in the gallery. From, their influences from childhood, or, they've been inspired by a sense of place. And this, of course, is manifested in various ways, sometimes through abstract paintings, sometimes through, landscape works, or through portraiture. But I feel that, as an artist, she really has the ability to capture and visually express a sense of place that people easily connect to, and that's very successful. This exhibition was unique in that we had an opportunity, when being challenged with the pandemic, to program outside of our walls. And so actually Erin Nelson, the manager of community development, had the idea to create a program called Walking the Flats Tour, where Theresa and participants would walk the path of the paintings.
The exhibit actually follows a geographical map, and it's accurate to the streets on the river flats. And so the walking tour matches some of those walks that follow the exhibit. So one side of the exhibit would be walking to school. So we actually did that as part of the walk. So people signed up, and we started where my first house was on Dominion Street, and we walked the same map, basically in the same streets that I show in the exhibit. And then along the way, we talk about some of the people that grew up there and what it was like to live there, and how commercially viable some of the businesses were, and just being part of a community.
Many participants had grown up in the river flats themselves, or their grandparents had, or they are new homeowners in the area, and it was just a lovely addition and an extension of the exhibition.
I have been on a lovely walk with my friend and artist, Theresa Eisenbarth. She's done a series of paintings of buildings and her life growing up down here in the flats. I'm learning lots about the flats, even though I lived here on Elm Street many years ago. I was at an art opening, and saw this picture on the wall, and I was drawn to it because I like color. She does like colors and makes like things come to life in color that normally aren't, like a pink cow or, So I went over and I saw who did the painting, and I couldn't believe it was her. So I phone her when I get home and go, like, are you an artist? Or, And so we find out, okay, that's my old boyfriend.
We're just gonna go down here. I don't remember anybody having just 2 kids in their family. I don't. All the families were large. She was particularly kind to us because she had a huge garden, and I called that painting, actually, It's Tomato Time. And the reason is because often, I don't know why we always ended up in her kitchen to eat. We always did. Like, I don't know if our mom was having a nap or she was just busy, but we'd go and, yeah, and she had the, like those chrome tables with the laminate on top, and it had the plastic, that draped over top of it, like to keep her table clean. But we are many a time at that house. They were classic neighbors. When your mom was busy and you needed somewhere to go, you went to that house, or you went to the ladies across the street. Everybody kind of worked together, right? If you were busy, everyone worked together to look after the kids in the neighborhood. I don't know what it was on the other blocks. And not to say that everybody on the block was great. I always think about, Sesame Street, how you have to watch for that neighbor, you have to watch for this neighbor. But, we had that one house. We used to hold our breath when we walked in front of that house. I think of it as how, what was it, where you had to skip the cracks in the sidewalk. Yeah, so that's kind of how we related to that house. We always we always held our breath when we went in front of the house. I graduated and then I went to Mesnac College, which would be similar to ACAD, so it's a visual communications program, like a design program. And back then in the 80s, there was no computers. You still did everything by hand. So even if you wanted to work for a print place, you had to cut everything out. It was a 4-color process, so we learned that. And I did end up going the fine arts stream, which then I transferred to University of Calgary, and I got my fine arts degree in Calgary, but not in painting. I did printmaking, lithography and etching and photography basically, but not like super professional studio portrait photography. We did more landscape and pinhole and stuff like that. You know, everyone said, oh, you have to go get an office job. This is what you're supposed to do. This is what society expects for you to do. And I couldn't do it. And my husband says, what do you want to do? And I says, I want to paint. He says, okay, good. So I started painting. So I've painted for 8 years now. I mean, everybody thought I was nuts. I mean, here you have a great job, you work your way in, it's kind of a government job, it's stable, all those sorts of things, but it's just not what I wanted to do. It's not where I saw myself going. And I don't know why I picked painting. I mean, I took one painting class when I was at the college. Never even took a painting class when I was at U of C. For the first year, I did kind of bounce around a little bit. Didn't really know what I was doing or experimenting with different paints and medium. And, I hadn't even taken a painting class, so a lot of figuring out the first couple of years. And then I did a small little business plan with a friend, and she kind of helped me get on track that way. And from then I started teaching classes and doing workshops, and it takes a while to find your focus, I guess. Like you don't know that right away. I think other artists that do are kind of blessed and gifted that way, but I didn't. I kind of banged around for a couple of years. For the first year, it was really hard because I tried to work from home. So I ended up getting a small little studio in an old church, and the church was a Lutheran church, and it was bought by 3 artists, and it's a working studio. It's a private working studio. So that really helped in terms of just being in an art group and being surrounded by art and art people. And so I painted my first exhibit when I was in that studio. Actually, my first 2 exhibits I painted in that studio. And then I thought, well, I needed some more space because I like, I guess, to collect things. I think most artists are collectors of some sort. And then I found this space, and this is owned by a friend. This particular building is used for storage, and it had a great space upstairs. And I work in here for probably about 6 months a year, and then I work at home. But it's turned out to be a great transition for me to be here. And I'm alone here most times, and I like that because I think to focus you need to be alone without a lot of distractions.
Theresa has these great qualities of being able to balance her creative practice with also the business side of being an artist. And so she has someone promoting her work. She's just networking and very communicative. She's very easy to talk to, very open, and just very dedicated to her practice and very professional. And I love working with folks who get things done on time and are reliable, and she's all of those things.
So you see, I used a little bit of that sporadic texture in there too, but this one doesn't have a ton of texture in it for the size that the painting is. Like this is 7 feet by 6 feet. So it's fairly large, fairly large piece. So I'm not sure if I mentioned, but all my pieces are done on birch wood.
I wondered, because over there it said on birch. And
Yeah,
is there a reason why you picked
so when I first started painting, I tried canvas because traditionally, everyone paints with canvas. And when I started using some of the mixed media products, it cracked. And sometimes I really layer a lot of mixed media product on. Like this is quite thick. It doesn't look that thick, but it is quite thick. And over time, I just thought canvas would loosen and have a little bit of that slack in it. So I just started painting on wood, and then now my husband builds them all for me.
That's good.
But I like them because they have a wide depth to them, and I don't know. I wouldn't paint on anything else, I don't think.
It just brings back memories of even just walking down my grandma's in Regina.
Yes.
There was the big lilac bushes and the gravel road and the electrical lines overhead, and now we drive down paved alleys
I
with
know,
vinyl fencing.
and I don't hide any of that stuff because I
love
find the lines interesting. The lilacs I love because when we grew up, nobody went to the store and bought flowers. Like, you know, me, I run to the nursery and I buy as many flowers as I can to plant. But back then, you know, lilacs were a big thing. When spring came and lilacs bloomed, it was a big thing. But I always called it the poor man's flower. It was a poor man's flower because we couldn't afford any other flowers except we had a lilac. We had a couple lilac bushes, but you know, they're natural to Medicine Hat. It's dry heat, but they're natural to all of Western Canada, right? And chokecherry trees.
Yeah.
Yeah, everyone had a chokecherry tree, right? Because you had to make your chokecherry jam. Yeah. So, but that's class. To me, that's classic Canadian, classic Western provinces.
I'm the fifth youngest. Theresa is 2 years younger than me, and so we have lots of family stories that we're sharing and recalling, you know, just events that happened, and in the summer and in the winter, and the neighbors where we grew up and who were our favorites, and just walking and enjoying those moments that we lived together. So it's very special. I really admire Theresa's art because it's so colorful. She really does capture a living presence of the buildings that she has painted. I've seen my sister actually throughout the number of years that she's been painting, and I've always been an avid follower, of course, and trying to support her. And I'm just so proud that she has worked so hard to get this exhibit at the Esplanade, and being able to do the walking tour and having the exhibit. She's going to get the recognition that she deserves, and she is so talented, and I'm so proud of her. I think this could be like a trendsetter, that more people should, you know, that Theresa's really captured that neighborhood and being together, and the special ties that it brings to people, that more people can develop those if we spend the time and really capture that moment, right? As children, how important that is, how it builds our characters, and how we all have stories to tell, right? And it really does, like her exhibit really does tell the story of where she grew up and how it made her who she is today.
So this is the corner, that Coburg Avenue. So this is the corner that you see in the Esplanade where it's called Into the Field. You know, you were safe going from this end of the street to the end of the street. Everything that happened in between was all good.
Did you have the siren
Yes.
for curfew
10
to go in?
o'clock.
10
Oh, yeah,
o'clock,
yeah,
the siren
yeah.
rang.
10
So that
o'clock,
started right after World War II, right? Like 50...
You know, I'm not sure
I
about
think
that.
it was after World War
think it was,
II.
yeah.
Yeah, and it's across from Swirls right now, the siren.
Yeah.
And they have the date. I think it was like 1952.
Did it
And
The
it's
start?
siren that they put off every night wasn't from the
1962, I
police
was in grade
station?
1.
No, it was a big siren across from. There's a huge
On the
tower
hill.
across from Swirls on
Yeah.
the hill
I didn't know
by
that.
the lawn bowling,
Is it still
and
there?
it's
I think
still
where the
there.
big
It's still
tower is,
there.
yeah.
The tower is there, but they've dismantled like the siren, like they just doesn't
But,
work anymore. But they've got a plaque.
I think the siren
Right there by
started right
In
Before?
1962.
Oh no, before it, like at the end of the war, kind of, or
Yes,
during,
yes.
yeah.
Well, it was a
But-
curfew
why-
during
That's what I
World War
mean.
II.
Yeah,
And then they just kept
Oh,
it
so
going?
that would have been like
42, 3.
So then they just kept it going after the war?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I don't even know
Kids
when did it
in-
stop?
inside.
Or has it stopped?
Well,
It has stopped.
Must have stopped.
My
still
hearing
hearing
isn't very
bells.
good.
we need a siren for Diane. Get her off the street at 10.
The paintings are vibrant. They evoke, for me, a nostalgia for kind of that small town life. You know, a lot of the paintings feature, you know, houses from the 1940s or back lanes or, you know, lilac bushes, things that can be found in any town or city across Canada. But Theresa has a way of just really personalizing the works, and that for the folks that have come to see the exhibition, they feel that connection, and that it is descriptive of Medicine Hat, which has a lot of historical buildings and just a lot of old trees, and so I describe the show as being these paintings that carry a vibrancy. It's an honest look, it's they're endearing in their honesty.
I just love it because it's so natural and colorful, and the trees are gorgeous.
Oh, I thought you were pointing to the grocery store, the Deluxe grocery store.
Well, I like that too,
Yeah.
very much. My mom used to shop there.
So that was our,
She lived down
yes, so that was our corner grocery store, was Deluxe. So instead of having to go to, like now you have Superstore and all the other co-op, everybody had a grocery store that was like 2 blocks away from their house. And we bought everything there. Christmas time, like instead of going to, we didn't have a car. So pretty well everything that you had to get had to be local, shop local. And we would go there at Christmas and my mom would give us some money for our Christmas tree, and they'd have an old Christmas lot, like I always say when you're in the movies or you watch some of the movies of New York and they go down the street and they get their Christmas tree and they pick it out and it's all wrapped up with, right? And then you drag it home. Basically that was our little store that we went to get our tree too. My mom
What I love about most of your paintings is you've really captured the true nature of how it looks down there. Like the streets, they're not straight, they're bumpy. And you can see all the sidewalks and the way the telephone wires and stuff like that. It's just so the way it is, only more vibrant and more appealing. But now that I've seen, this is my third time seeing your show. This is my third time. I brought my grandkids to see it too, and they loved finding the keys and saying, oh, I remember, I can recognize this place now, So it's really awesome. I love walking the flats and looking for these paintings.
Well, and I had a couple of people that actually came to the exhibit and they hadn't been down there for years and years and years, and they actually had taken the brochure and then they actually walked the same streets before they knew we were doing programming through the Esplanade for the walking tour. And that really touched my heart kind of, because I thought, wow, that's very inspiring too, right? That people actually want to go to the location and see and visit the river flats again. And that's why I find older communities unique, because they're not the cookie cutter houses. They are all unique houses, Many families have grown up in places like the river flats. That's where the blue collar workers lived. They're all big families that lived in many of these houses, even though when we look now, like this house, for instance, that's pretty tiny, but there's probably a family of 5-6 kids that live there. So
Good majority were CPR workers.
CPR workers, Medelta, Highcroft Pottery, Ogilvy Mills, many industry on the flats during that time, right? So blue collar neighborhood. Each leg of the tour has passing neighborhoods on the way to school, and then we end up at school. And I put the map and the geographic location of all the walks on the wall, just because then people can see that they do follow the locations on the river flats area.
That's very clever.
Yeah.
Very.
Made sense to me, I guess, at the time.
I think it's great. Where did you get this inspiration from to do this work?
So I've been painting Medicine Hat and probably Urbanscape for a while. I guess when I first started painting, I was doing what everybody else was doing, what I saw, like they were painting birch trees or they were painting flowers. And I still paint a lot of that stuff, but it didn't really mean anything to me. So when I started walking back down on the flats, go for a walk at night, I thought, yeah, to me, it always felt like home because I grew up there. When I'm driving, I often pull over and take photos. So this is actually a shot that is just outside of Medicine Hat towards Bow Island. And just, southern Alberta, classic landscape. It's the clouds and the sky and how dramatic the sky was. I just love that. Some artists are really good. They can paint from their minds, but I don't tend to work. My mind doesn't tend to work that way. So I have a lot of photo reference, and then I print them out 8.5 by 11, and often I'll do a sketch of what I want to convey, I guess, and
then I lay things out with black paint or gesso, black gesso often. Gesso is a surface prep, and many of the companies have it for art supplies. And I like it because it's matte. It has a real flat look to it. And so usually I draw all my stuff out with black gesso first. And then I may do some value work in terms of light, medium, and dark. And then I'll start using glazes just to cover the surface because I don't like a white surface. And often I'll use like magenta, like a quinacridone color, a new modern color, or I'll use like an orange. And the reason that I do that is because it's a medium value. And then I'll add like a highlight and then a really, really dark, and it kind of keys the painting of how I can start. I like to experiment, and I'm always surprised when I find like a new color combination that I find interesting or works. I think when you first start to paint, you are very concerned with just the mechanics, and you read all these books and you think you have to do things a certain way. I don't really follow any of that. That's not intuitive for me. I probably am more of an intuitive painter. So I pick colors I like and I paint with those. I use a lot of violets and a lot of magenta in my paintings. I use a lot of red and yellows. And sometimes, if I'd go to a workshop, they say, well, that's not a complementary color. Well, I don't really care. It's colors I like. So, I'm the one doing it, so. It's very hard to stop painting sometimes. Now I'll look at it and I'm better at leaving a painting for a day or two, and then I'll go back to it and fix what needs to be fixed. But that is something I struggle with, overpainting. And I think some of the stuff that I've done is overpainted when I look at it now. I read years ago that you should always underpaint by 10%, but it's a very hard training thing of when to stop. And sometimes, like even that big one, people say, "Oh, that's done." Well, that's just started, right? So it's funny what people perceive, but I want them to have a certain look, and when I kind of achieve that, like going forward now, that's kind of my goal, is to just stop, leave things. As long as I have the right highlights where I think they're supposed to be in the darks, I think you have to decide it's finished, right?
So it doesn't look like a massive hill, but when you're little, this is where we went tobogganing. And we would toboggan here probably till 9, 10 o'clock at night. And every night everyone would meet back in the winter, and this is where the action happened, right? And we would spend hours from across kitty corner. We knew the kid in the corner, or in the corner house. We would have our buckets with us, and we would fill buckets of water, and we would put water on this thing, so it was like super slick, right? Hours spent there doing the same repetitive thing over. You think we would have got sick of it, but it was fun. He was a World War II vet, and he was homeless. So we have 2 homeless people in Medicine Hat, Bill Bliss and Phoebe. Phoebe was just like a bag lady, and she had a shopping cart, but like by your place on Princess off of Balmoral.
My husband was born in Quebec, and we met, married, and moved to Medicine Hat because he got a job. And we loved this neighborhood when we first moved here because he's from a treed neighborhood and I'm from a treed neighborhood. And the boulevard streets were absolutely stunning. And so we moved here and bought a house here 31 years ago, and we're still in the same house. Theresa's very good at, when she paints, she has a story that goes with each painting. And so these stories are even more personal because it's our neighborhood. Our boys grew up in the flats. And it's Theresa's style, it's Theresa's colors, and she's a very good friend. She's like sister / little daughter / all of that stuff rolled up because she was there when our children were born. We grew up next to her. She's now a painter, she's an artist. I've taken classes from her. And to see our neighborhood through her eyes with her skill and her beauty, it's lovely. I think we're all searching for the nostalgia of back in the day when children were outside running, and neighbors talked to each other over the fence, and you dropped in for coffee, and you knew your neighbors, and you knew their names, and I think there's a part of that old neighborhoods had. Like, they really did have it, and you want to recapture it somehow, but of course it's never the same. But you still can recapture the caring and nurturing aspect of a neighborhood, no matter where you are, no matter what neighborhood you're living in. I think everybody wants that. I still know all my neighbors, though, and we still yell at each other over the back alley or over the fence, and I still know all my neighbors, and that, to me, if I ever think of moving, that was what would hold me back, is that, wow, I'm getting on in years. And if I fall, I can call Margie and Bob, or Rodney, or Steve and Nadine. I mean, that's to me what neighborhoods are all about.
I forget what it was called, but we never had to.
Elm Street Market.
Yeah, and so she'd go, Diane, go down and get some milk. You know, I think I was like 4.
Yeah.
And I'd go down and get some milk and not know, like I didn't know you even needed money. Because there must have had little accounts, right?
Yeah.
So we'd go down there, and then we'd go down and get gum and, you know, things like that. But the one thing I remembered is, remember hotels like Eva Hotel? I don't know if any of you remember them. They lived sort of like if you went to the end of where the prairie was, and you turned right, and on that street, hotels lived there. And I thought it was so cool that their name was Hotel, for one thing. And they ate a rabbit one night.
Oh my
And I couldn't believe that, well, Frenchie stewed rabbit, you know, it's not a, you know. But to me, it seemed like they ate the Easter bunny.
But it was
So,
very foreign for people to eat rabbits, but people who came over from Europe, like
Yes.
Mom, they ate rabbits all the time.
so that is a huge memory of me living on Elm Street, was the hotels eating a rabbit.
We used to drive down into these kind of hard to get and hard to find spots and they'd sneak some beer in. But the girls, we usually drank apricot brandy.
Oh,
That's one of your starting points. So anyway, some necking and carry on, and then away you'd go back home. And
The drive of shame home.
Yeah, now I don't even want to look at apricot brandy.
But it was very secluded down
Yeah,
there. So
yeah, it
we
was
had
good.
secret
And we'd have,
place to
you know,
hide.
a couple of cars, the guys would arrange this as the date. So, yeah,
Weren't they smart?
yeah.
And that was with her.
I think my favorite painting in the whole exhibition is the one of the
river.
The cliffs and the river. Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of iconic. Medicine Hat right there. I think everybody probably takes pictures of the cliffs too on the sunset too. It's
Right?
almost
There's
supposed to be early morning, but it's more almost looks like late at night, right?
It's beautiful.
Just the kind of lighting and the reflection off it. You rarely see the water that still or that blue. But that's like ideal conditions.
It's crystal blue.
Yeah, that's how everybody envisions it anyway. So it's very dreamlike.
When COVID hit, it was a very odd time to be the first artist to be featured at the Esplanade. A, I'd never had a big show like that before. And B, with all of the new restrictions, I didn't know exactly even if they were going to have the gallery open or if it was just going to be an online exhibit. I mean, really, I was just happy to have anything and happy to have my work shown because it's such an honor to have your work in the Esplanade and to have that kind of ticked off your list and have it on your CV. I was I would say in the middle of the project, and I just continued painting. So for me, it really didn't impact my life all that much because I just got up every morning and went to my studio at home and painted every day.
You know, because artists are generally, independent, small businesses, the artists that I spoke to weren't impacted that significantly in that a lot of artists, have their studio, they go to their studio, they spend a great deal of time in isolation, focused and being creative. The flip side of that, some artists creativity was definitely impacted and they felt more paralyzed by what was going on with the pandemic and weren't able to be creative. I thought I was very impressed with Theresa in that she created 40 paintings since last October, so I think that's in 9 months. So she's prolific in her practice and was able to remain focused and committed to the project, and even completed the works early in that our dates had shifted and we opened the exhibition earlier than expected. Because this was new to everyone, no one had experienced a pandemic before, we didn't know what was going to go on. We didn't know if we were all going to be at our homes self-isolating for 6 months. No one could really say. But then we also shifted our focus to then be proactive for that potential of when we do reopen, and put a lot of work into policies and procedures for when that time happened, which was June 15th. We have to rethink the way we're connecting with community. And so in April, we began to develop content for our virtual programming that is both on our website and esplanade.ca, as well as all our social media platforms. And so everyone from our museum staff to our theater technicians to the archivists to our art gallery preparator and assistants, we've all come together to develop content that's accessible for the public remotely. Basically what you do is you'll click on the link, and the link opens up where you're essentially as though you're standing in the gallery. And so you navigate the space, but either depending on the device that you're on, by just hitting certain colored dots throughout. We also have all of the content, so the text throughout the exhibition. We also have artists, Theresa herself, captured through video and speaking to the work on that platform. And so people experiencing the work through this three-dimensional 3D virtual tour, it's very similar to actually being in person.
Exhibits are extremely important for an artist because that's where, you have to have eyes on your work. There's a 3D exhibit that the Esplanade did a great job of putting together, and the comment is, if we can't get there, that's a great substitute for people who can't get there, or with COVID if they have to stay at home. But there's nothing like seeing art in person. So the exhibits are a crucial part to that. But space is limited. Like, there's not a lot of galleries anymore. Some galleries have closed down. I'm only started looking for commercial galleries to have my work represented, and that's all new to me too. So I don't know what the process is. I'm just doing it the way I think I should do it, like I've done everything else. You think you have to have this big strategy, but I don't know what the answer to that is. I'll just apply and see what happens, I guess, right? Hopefully somebody will like what I'm doing and kind of connect with some of the things that I'm painting in terms of the neighborhoods and urban landscape. And there's a segment out there, I'm sure, that will like it. You have to be confident about that too, I guess, in some respect.
My initials are the TE, so there's a history about that too, because the TE is actually my husband's. It was their branding. So his name is Terry, my name's Theresa, both last name, and that's his branding. So we called it the Lazy TE. But when I first started painting, nobody tells you how to do everything. Nobody ever wants to share any information. So I could not sign Eisenbarth with a paintbrush at all. And nobody had said, well, why don't you try maybe one of those paint markers? That would have made a lot of sense. Took a few years to figure it out. So I used to do this with a brush, and then eventually it went into the, yes, now I use a paint marker, but then I sign the sides. And so most of my work isn't framed because people like to see the signature on the side. Yeah, funny how, signing your name is such a big deal. Originally, this layout was supposed to be in the other gallery though. So we had it laid out for the other gallery. And then 2 weeks before, they said, oh, we're gonna do it in this gallery. Okay, we'll redesign and relay everything out. It wasn't that big of a deal, but when you're working on a scale with the white walls,
It's a little bit of planning. So we actually had a couple extra paintings in here, and I thought this was supposed to be covered up. So it was good we took them out anyways. I couldn't finish them, so I didn't have enough time. But it was good that we took them out, and it just happened to work. So I like working on a theme. So when I start, like once I have the concept in my mind, then when I start laying everything out, I actually plan all the sizes, because then my husband has to build them all. And then with it being on wood, they all have to be filled with wood filler. And then I size them all twice with kind of like a glue sizer. Then they're all coated twice with gesso, sanded in between, and then I start painting. Yeah, it's a lot of prep to get them done. Yeah, sometimes I think it would be easier to go to the store and just go buy a canvas, but the look is not the same, so.
I love that every house is different and every corner is different.
I love the corners,
Yeah.
the corners with the street signs. Yeah.
It's
Everyone always says, oh, that could have been my grandma's house. Well, it wasn't always everyone's grandma's house. It was, you know, a family that lived there, but yeah. And this is an interesting area from when we grew up. So Strathcona actually used to have an old fort, an old RCMP fort that we used to play at. And this was all, some of it was developed, but it was all very wild looking, especially down here, right? Right down by the South Saskatchewan River, none of that was developed. So the grass would be like this tall, and you would just run around for hours and hours and hours. And then at 10 o'clock, when that siren went off, they used to have a curfew. Then you'd have to run back to your house for the curfew at 10 o'clock. But, and not to say that we were wild, there was a lot more freedom then. Moms were busy, they had huge gardens, big families, right? You played outside. You didn't come back unless you had to have a snack or eat, and you know, maybe you'd be on the street, and you know, the Italian lady down the street would notice that maybe you needed a bowl of something, so you know, you'd go into her house and sit at her little table with her plastic on the table, and she'd feed you a bowl of noodles with tomato sauce. So it was just that kind of life, and things were a lot more safe then. But were they safe? I don't know. Sometimes I wonder. Or are we just too hyper vigilant about everything now? I'm not sure.
Technology wasn't there either.
Yeah, it wasn't, yeah. So there wasn't that, I mean, maybe there were things going on, I don't know. And sometimes I think the innocence was kind of nice.
Which is what you've depicted so well in these photos.
Well, I think being connected is great, social media is great, but it doesn't get you to know somebody better, or it doesn't, there's still that lack of that personal looking in the eyes and that personal contact, which I think we're really missing today. I think so, especially with COVID, right? So coming out of this with COVID and painting this when COVID was going on, it was kind of a nice reminder, you know, you need to be in your neighborhood, you need to know your neighbor, because sometimes that was the only person that you could talk to over the fence other than your husband, who, you know, either or after a while, you're both driving each other crazy, right?
Need a friend.
Yeah, so, you know, I think that connectedness to where you live is important. You know, everyone has an old neighborhood like this in their backyard. It's kind of the roots of the city, it's kind of where things were founded, it's where people originally settled. And I think that's what makes it unique and full of character.
I think probably a few years ago, 5 or 6 years now, Theresa rented a space from us. There were 2 other ladies and myself, bought an old church, St. Paul's Lutheran Church over on Elm Street, which isn't far from here. And Theresa rented a space and did her own art, and then gradually wanted more space because she was really getting into heavy-duty, serious painting and turning more into a professional area. And so she moved out in another area of these flats neighborhoods, and so we've stayed in touch. And it's been really neat to watch what she's been doing and really just digging in and getting more committed and more serious about the art, and it's just turning out wonderful. She takes sometimes a different angle. A lot of us would say this was Aunt Betty's house, and so you go to the front and you take a picture and do that. But a lot of hers are from a little bit different approach, a side view maybe, or a back porch, like a little bit different. There's certainly some fronts, but, and also, so that I find interesting. Her colors are there's more color than maybe what we see, but it points out the structures and the interests. And when you look at every single picture, after a few minutes, I see some little thing that I didn't see, like a quick look. Oh, that's John Brown's house. Yeah, okay. But then you look a little closer. Oh, I didn't know he had that little, or look at the mailbox, or something through the window reflecting. It's so neat, little things like that. What's happened is that the people on this tour are all calling up memories that are so interesting from either they knew and played with Theresa and her family, or similar in their own community and neighborhood.
So now we're on Allowance Avenue, so we're continuing on our walk to school. We have a noisy beagle now that's next door and howling. He wants to be part of the entertainment, I guess. And this was a house that was quite special to me. And in the exhibit, it's called Don't Forget the Cream, Mama. And the reason that I painted this house is because one of the only friends I had was they were a Polish family, and they were also a family that also had 8 kids, like our family did. But to me, it was very amazing because as soon as you would walk into the kitchen in this house, it was quiet. Their kitchen was shaded. It was so nice and cool. It was such a great break, as opposed to our house where it was super hot in our house and a kerfuffle activity, even though we had the same amount of kids in both families. But the reason that I loved going over there, because as soon as you would sit down at the kitchen table, this miraculous amount of food would appear on the table. Obviously, I was all about the food when we grew up, and all the different ethnic families, because everybody fed us, but it was the first time I ever had anything close to like a pierogi or any of that. To me, it was quite exotic because we were a very potato, meat sort of family, but to go over to their house and have something completely, to me, which was exotic, different, was an amazing experience. So anyways, that's the Dumanowski house. We're going to continue on up the street, and we're going to go to where I went to elementary school. You're a goof. So as we have new grocery stores, or new little convenience stores in the neighborhood, this was one of the original grocery stores. So in the exhibit, this is called Cash for Groceries. And this building, to me, when we went to school, was always kind of a mystery, because I'm thinking, Cash for Groceries, that's on the top of the building. You know what things kind of go through your head when you're little, right? And people live there, and there's no groceries. So there used to be a market that used to be next door when we grew up, and it had like, well, it was a building, but you could tell it had like the outdoor stalls that they used to be able to bring goods. Right there? No. Yeah, this was St. Louis. So they never had those annexes. They never had on there. The school was kind of creepy. Like for once, the library was in the basement, right? But when you went up the stairs, they had this huge, like massive, like it went all the way up to the second floor. Like, what is that? I don't even know how many feet that is, but it was a bookcase. And in the bookcase, they had all these specimens preserved in, like, what would it have been? Formaldehyde. Like just weird stuff. And I'm thinking, like, where's Bill Nye the Science Guy? Because they never took anything out of, so as a kid, like, they never took anything out of the case, only put things in the case, right?
Yeah. Do you ever add in something from memory, or just a little thing?
I'll take things out.
Okay.
Like, for instance, on this one here on the school, they have a fence, and we had a tetherball. Our tetherball, actually, competition area was right in the front. And I didn't put that in, I considered it. But I wanted this a really clean look. So a lot of the stuff that you see in front of the building now, I actually took some of those things out to simplify it. Because I wanted I always want the focus to be on a certain area. And I always often focus on doors. Doors are kind of my thing, I guess, in some regard. But on this one here, I wanted all the bright parts of the painting to be here. So to me, that was just extra stuff you didn't need. But I also loved the little bits of a car peeking through, or, you know.
The background detail.
Yeah, yeah.
When you go to this building from the flats to St. Louis, that's there.
Yes, it is, yeah. I mean, there might be a few things here and there that, yeah. You have to simplify as much as possible. Otherwise, it's just too much overwhelming detail to paint. Most of these have keys in them. It's kind of been my signature since probably about the second year I started painting. So sometimes you can see them, sometimes they're obscured. So when I was in my first studio, it was an old church that they use as an artist studio, and I rented a room there. And they were redoing all of their locks and doors. And so they said, okay, well, there's a pile to go to the dump in the back. Go through and see if there's anything that you want. And I had already been painting doors. I did the doors of downtown. I did some abstract doors, kind of trying to find what I wanted to paint. And so when I found this box of keys, and it had hinges and parts of the doorknob in it, it just kind of made sense. I like the idea of repurposing something and using that in my work. But I think a key for me has become more of a metaphor of opportunity. I often put words in too.
I noticed, yeah, in the odd one, and now we find ourselves going and looking and seeing if we can find these little hidden treasures.
Tidbits of gems. It's kind of like the Finding Waldo method.
Yeah, I love it.
So when I pick a word a year, so these ones really don't, so you can see it's a little obscured here. You can't really read it, but there's other paintings actually where you can read the word. Right. Depends how busy I am when I'm painting or what I tend to be maybe listening to at the time. But I pick a word a year, and I've done that since I started painting. So it's always, basically it's just the definition I get off of Google, and I take a portion of that word and that goes in the painting. So this year my word, it was experience. So experience is in all the paintings. Like I said, sometimes they're exposed and sometimes they're covered up.
Some of the artwork you've had more texture, like the sand and the rocks on the roads, and then others are more...
Right.
Is that, like, over time, have you added those in, or is it just in the moment you put that in? Or?
Well, I probably pulled myself back because I used to work with a ton of more texture, and now I've settled on, like, I've kind of settled on my palette colors, and I'm kind of settled on what I use in my work. So I use a lot of gel. So when it's really super glossy on some of these paintings, there's lots of coatings of gel that help. And I draw with the gel too. And then when you varnish them, it's gloss on top of gloss. So then that's why you'll see some are very glossy. But then you'll see some paintings like on the other side that are very flat and they don't have any mixed media products in them. So it's basically just paint. Yeah, and then this leg of the tour was our shopping day, was usually Friday. And this was always an important street. So this is North Railway in Medicine Hat. And we would, you know, my mom would pack my sisters up and I, and we would walk along this street and go downtown. That's when we went to City Hall and the old post office. And if we had any big shopping to do, because there were no malls back then, we went to Woolworths and we went to Kresge's, and if you're lucky, you got French fries maybe at one of the places. But on the way home, we would often stop at the bakery. And it's nice that this is being revitalized a little bit, and that there's new stores being put in on the street, because for so many years it was really needed some upkeep. Really needed got lost. So in lots of these ways, when I paint some of these things, it's my reimagining, because they are quite vibrant. The colors aren't super true to nature, but I mean, I focus on color and light, so.
The reaction has been, it's just immense. We've had, you know, over probably close to 700 people through, and you know, even people that I've spoken to who say, you know, in July, who had not yet been to the exhibit, they had heard about the exhibit and love Theresa's works and want to own one of her paintings. And I think for, you know, when people seek, you know, a new experience, especially during a pandemic, what I found is this exhibition, both exhibitions, were very just uplifting. And, you know, it creates a opportunity for people to see and consider things they haven't ever before. And it's, I'm pleased to be able to help make that happen.
What I hope people take away from the exhibit is there's a time and place for online and social media, but I think with COVID, it's a reminder that relationships are important, looking in somebody's eyes are important. You know, in lots of ways, social media is great, but it's not real. It's not a relationship. Being in your neighborhood, going to your store, going to your local dry cleaner, that's a relationship. I think that's what I hope people take away. And also that we can improve and we can reimagine and we can make it look spectacular. Neighborhood to me is the people. It's the small mom and pop shops. It's your local grocery store. And they don't have to be a big grocery store. It could be a little convenience store. To me, it's supporting those people locally because, I mean, online shopping is great, but if we all do online shopping, there's going to be no stores left. So I try and support local as much as I can, and I think with COVID, that's been very prevalent in people's mind. Oh, I want to go there and buy a gift certificate. I don't want them to close, is what you heard over and over again. And I think that's really a strong aspect of neighborhood, is supporting some of those smaller businesses, micro businesses, kind of keeping everybody going, but also having that person next door that you can phone if you need somebody, or if you're out chatting. Like yesterday we were joking a lot about popping in. Like nobody pops into your house anymore. You know, you have to have everything's so scheduled. You need an appointment, it seems, to go and visit somebody. But you know, during COVID, like, who did you visit with? You visited with a person across the fence because you had nobody else to talk to. Well, I don't think I'm an archivist in any regards. My first exhibit was like some of the stories. So normally when I paint, I'll have a story that matches the painting, or it could be a thought. And my first exhibit was very historical based, so I think that's how I started. And I painted some of the historical buildings on river flats, or I wouldn't even say they're historic. They're just buildings that I grew up with, like the old arena. We used to call it the chiclet seats because all of the seats were different colors. So those are just memories, I guess. Because when we grew up, everything centered in our downtown. We never had a mall. We never had a big complex to go to a hockey game. Everything was on the river flats. You could walk everywhere. So those are just things that were familiar to me.
I guess it's pretty emotional because it's pretty well 6 months of my life on the walls. But also the journey of painting and experiencing being in a larger gallery. Like, this is more of a national gallery, so I've really worked hard and I've done pop-up shows of my own. So to have it in a place like this is quite significant for me. And people, especially local people, think, oh, well, you know, that's our own local building. You should be able to get a show there. But, you know, with grant funding and limited wall space, it's not always easy to attain that. It's not as easy as people think. So when you are able to have a show, I just wish people would recognize it is a pretty big deal. So, and it's national exposure because it's a national gallery, so their mandate is different. But of every show that I have painted, I've always kept one painting for myself. So, and actually it's that one over there.
How come that one?
Because it is the street that I grew up on, and it was my sidewalk to go to our house. And I think painting-wise, I accomplished a lot in that painting that I see. I mean, other people look at it. My daughter looked at it and she said, oh, well, you know, your sidewalk's crooked. And I said, well, the sidewalk probably was crooked. And it's exaggerated, but I just think painting accomplishment for me, I'm pretty proud of some of the things I accomplished in that painting. So,
what's it like as an artist to engage with people appreciating it?
Well, that has been actually a wonderful part of the experience, because when I was working on the large lilac painting, people would come in, so they would post that I was painting live, and people would come in and then they'd wander through and they'd look, and then eventually they would come over to where I was painting and ask a whole bunch of questions about why I'm using that color. But you know, then stories would come out, oh, my grandma lived on Bramer Street, or she lived on Ross Street, and I remember doing this. And I just think that connection with people is critical. And like I said, with going through COVID, I think it was just a more powerful experience for people to be connected to their neighborhood a little bit more closer than I think we normally are. So, I mean, I use the word magical atmosphere for neighborhoods lots, because I think there's something in a neighborhood we've forgotten.
I think what I love about the paintings is that, you know, I'm a nostalgic person and an artist as well, and so I create work that's rooted in past personal experiences. And so with this work, yeah, I just find that the ability to broadly connect with folks, it makes it very successful. Yeah, I just find them to be uplifting. I think because of their vibrancy, you know, they're not high realism paintings, but they just express this positivity about community and place, and I guess that's what I love about them.
The response to the exhibit, I think, has been, for me, a little bit overwhelming. It's been great. Like, when I was planning it, I thought, in the back of my mind, I thought, oh, people are gonna think I'm so simple. Because I'm not fancy. I always say I'm a kind of a blue collar painter. And then, you know, at first I was kind of second guessing it, but I thought, well, I'm into this now, I'm just gonna do it. And I don't know, I had no idea. But, you know, people have really related to being part of a neighborhood, especially with COVID, because everyone was cooped up and scared to go out. And having a neighbor next to you, or being in a neighborhood where you trust people and you can talk to people and people watch out for one another, I think with COVID that was really reinforced and really quite powerful. I'm not trying to make a big statement about anything. I started painting houses I knew. I started painting small businesses because I saw businesses closing down, and it upset me. Like, I thought these people's lives are important. Like, they put everything, as a business owner, you live and breathe your business. And to see some of the places on North Railway close down, I just thought, oh, like, it's tragic. I just thought it was tragic. When you're in a small neighborhood like that, your corner store is kind of where you see people and you go for a cup of coffee, or, you know, you grab things and you see the person down the street and you ask about their mom, or you ask about their dad, or, yeah, I think that's what it was. So, I mean, social media is great and it's got its time and place for it, but I think there's just that part of that connection that you don't get and unless you see people face to face. That's part of being in a neighborhood. Well, I'm most proud that I've increased my production for work. I know I can do that. I have a certain confidence now about how many paintings I can produce. I think that's a huge accomplishment for me. I'm also proud that people have responded so positively in the subject matter that I chose, because I've been moving this way for many years. And so it was a little bit of a leap of faith for me to have to do an exhibit of that subject matter that I chose, because, like I said, you gotta pick a lane, you gotta stay in the lane, and this is the lane I chose. So the response has been great. I don't think it matters what age. I had young teenagers on the walking tours too, and they found it so interesting. They said, oh, I had no idea, because their lives are so different. And when you live in a new neighborhood, it's cookie cutter. It's not unique. It's not, you know, there's just something about an old neighborhood, I think, that's comforting for people.
Okay, we'll stop here. So this is the tale of two houses. So this was our second home. So our home was actually there. This house was our house where we grew up, so that's 838. And this was our neighbors that were the Cotes before Joanne Hamel purchased the house. We had great memories of living on this block.
Oh, yeah.
No. Oh, this one is in here. Yeah, it's right here.
Two houses.
Tale of two houses.
Okay, so that's that. So this was your old new house.
This is our house right there.
Oh, okay. So
Yeah.
this is your neighbors.
This is our neighbors.
Cotes.
Cotes, where he lived there.
Joanne lives. And
Okay.
So that's, try and keep
Morris
pay attention.
and Donna. This was Donna and Morris Cote that lived here, and they had 5 kids. Well, I've learned a lot. I've learned a lot on many aspects. I think I was surprised more than anything that people thought the same way I did. Because when you talk to other people, I mean, they do talk about, oh, I ordered this, or I ordered that, or I ordered this, and I'm thinking, you ordered that? Like, why didn't you just go down the street and just go buy it? I mean, it might cost you a few more dollars, but so I think that's what I've learned, that other people think the same way that I do, and it's not all about being online. It's about
interacting with people and having that connection. I guess that connection, I think it's all about connection, togetherness, connection. And, you know, globalization is great, but, you know, if you don't support your own roots in your own community, you're gonna have nothing left in a few years.